In the last section of this workshop, we are now going to build our Astro UI to consume the data found inside our Strapi CMS. And we're going to start by creating a new Astro command, and we're just going to call that UI. And you've seen this before. We're just going to go through the same steps as we've done before. We're just going to set up a very basic empty Astro project from scratch. And here is our project, and we are going to start developing our application. Now, inside the public folder, I'm going to create a new folder called that styles. And in there, I'm just going to create a new file called styles.css. And I'm just going to add all the styles that we're going to be using for this project. And feel free to reuse these styles or modify them as you see fit. But for now, we're just going to be using these as our basic color scheme. Inside the sources folder, so we have pages index.astro as we've seen it in the very beginning where we talked about the basics of Astro. In the source folder, I'm going to create a couple of folders. One is going to be called components, where we're going to be developing our Astro components. Then I will also create layouts and lib as well. So right click, new folder, and then lib. And these will be the folders that we need. And inside layouts, I'm going to start by creating a layout.astro file, and we're going to be building our layout together. Now I will not only need a layout.astro file, but also a head.astro as well as a nav.astro file as well. So we're going to be adding these. Now inside head.astro, I'm going to utilize just the head HTML element. And actually I did this to the wrong place. So this is head.astro. And also notice here a new property available on the global Astro object that we did not talk about, which is called props. So essentially, just like how in any other framework, when you work with components, you can pass properties or props to those components. And you can pass a description, and you can pass a title, or you could pass whatever you want. And I'm going to show how this works to you in just a moment. So let's go, for example, to layout.astro. In here, I could create something like this, just a title, and then description, a description. And I could make this equal to astro.props as well, like so. And then in here, if I use the head component, I can now pass the title and the description like this as props. And of course, I need to make sure that head is imported from head.astro. Now notice this syntax here. Actually, this is very interesting because this is unique to Astro, whereby if the property and the variable that holds the value for the property are the same, you can just simplify the prop sending by wrapping the variable in curly braces, because otherwise you would have to do something like title is equal to and then pass a title. But because the variable representing the value for the title is also called title, and the prop that we are sending to head is also called title, we can just simplify this to this syntax. Okay, so let's add HTML here, and let's also make sure that we close that. And let's build out our main layout file. Now we will need to specify a style sheet as well, and that is available under /styles styles.css. Notice that I'm starting this path with a /, so anything that you put into the public folder is going to be available by using / and then the folders and then the appropriate file names as well. Then we're going to have the body, and inside the body I'm going to have a main, then in there I'm going to have a section, and inside the section we're going to have the slot itself. Okay, so this is going to be our basic HTML structure. We are also going to be using a custom Google font, which is called Cinzel or Chinzel. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce this one. It's just, a very nice looking font that I thought would be appropriate for this particular site. Now, the only thing that's missing, and then, we can start working on the actual app, is the navigation. So I'm just going to add a very simple navigation, and notice that we're going to have our English blog running on /blog, and then our Spanish blog running on /blog/es, but more on this later. And now we just need to make sure that, of course, we add the navigation into the layout, and that's going to be in between the body and the first main element in here, making sure that we also import nav from the nav.astro file like so. Okay, and then let's just make a quick test. So inside index.astro, I'm just going to put something like an h1 that says hello world, and of course make sure that we also wrap this in the layout that we just created, and make sure that we import the layout from the appropriate location like so. And now we can run npm run dev, go to localhost 4321 in the browser, and see what we get. All right, so here it is. We have home, blog, and then a Spanish blog, and we do in fact have hello world. All right, so the very first thing that I would like to do is build the landing page. And if you remember, we have access to the landing page content coming from the Strapi CMS. And also remember that if you go to the Astro docs, you will have this entire section that tells you how to integrate with the Strapi CMS. In fact, there's going to be a couple of steps that we're going to be following from here. And this is written in TypeScript, by the way, but we're still going to be using JavaScript. But then we're going to be modifying this fetch API function that they have here to match what we need to do with Strapi. So the very first thing that the Astro documentation suggests is to set up an environment variable to the Strapi URL. And this is going to be spot on. So let's actually follow this suggestion as well. So inside the root of the UI folder, I am going to create a new file called a .env. And then in here, which is going to add the Strapi URL, which is going to point to localhost and then to the port. Now, of course, you could set up something like a Strapi URL dev. You could also do a Strapi URL production, because of course, when you deploy this application to production, it would have a different URL. But regardless of that, we have this environment variable, which is going to be really, really nice. And so now we can go back to sources, lib, and in here, create a file called strappy.js. Now, this strappy.js file is going to be responsible for making the API calls to Strapi itself. And I'm just going to quit the terminal so that we get some more screen real estate here. This is a function that is very similar to what you see inside the Strapi documentation, except it has been extended by a page and a locale parameter to match our application type. So basically, every time when we make an API request to localhost 1337/API/an endpoint, we will be able to pass certain settings, for example, a locale, and then the locale is then going to append to the requesting URL. Or if we do a query, then that's going to add a query parameter to the URL. If we're going to be looking for a page, we're just going to make sure that the URL is going to look like this. So we have populate and the landing page, and then populate is going to be asterisk. And so that is exactly what we had a look at here. If you look at the URL here in the browser real closely, it goes to /API/pages, populate landing page, populate equals to asterisk. And this is the correct way to grab all the page data with all the components and all the content belonging to those components. And so this is something that I added on top of what you see in the Astro documentation. And then basically what this file is going to do is just making a fetch API request and just transforming that request or the data that comes back to a JSON format, and then is just going to return that for us. Okay, so think of this lib/strappy.js file as a helper function that will allow us to make requests to the Strapi CMS from the Astro UI that we are working on. Okay, now if I look at the pages index.astro file, as I said, this is where I would like to build the layout or the landing page for my particular project. And if you recall, inside Strapi, so let's go back here to the content manager real quick, we have two components. We have a hero component, and then we have an about component as well. So the way I like to think about this is that if I've created two components inside my CMS, then I should create two components inside my UI as well. And in light of that, I'm going to create an about.astro and a hero.astro component as well. Okay, so inside the hero Astro component, I'm just going to return an h1 and a paragraph. The h1 is going to be the hero text and the paragraph is going to be the hero description. Again, just to correlate this, we have the hero text here, and then we have the hero description right here. Now, the other question is, of course, how am I going to get the hero text and the hero description? Well, I'm going to send those as props. Okay, so I will send the hero text and the hero description as props via astro.props into this component. And then in the h1, I want to make sure that I print out hero text. And then in the paragraph, that I print out hero description. And I'm going to do the same for the about component. And again, just to correlate that, we have the about text, and then we have a photo here as well, which does get exposed here. As you can see, there's a URL for it. It's a WebP file that we can access. So this is under about photo, data, and then attributes formats. Now, luckily for us as well, Astro has a built-in image component. And we can use this image component to actually render images out inside our Astro project, even if it's coming from a CMS. So let's take a look at how that would look like. And then we are going to be, of course, seeing whether we can generate these pages. So let's go to about.astro. And in here, I would like to have just a paragraph displaying the text, and then I would like to have the image here as well. Okay, so what I need to do now is grab the about text and the about photo URL. Let's make that lowercase like that, from astro.props. So again, I'm going to send these information as props to this component. And then I can now print out about text here. And last but not least, I'm going to import the image component from Astro and assets. So this is where the built-in image component looks like. And I also need to generate a photo URL, because what the CMS is going to return to me is going to be this URL here. Uploads large Alaric, Windwalker, etc., etc., etc. But I need the full URL in order to be able to add the image itself to the Astro image component. So what I need to do is call import.meta.env.strappy_URL. This is how you access the environment variable, and then just append the about photo URL to that. And now I can use that photo URL as the source attribute to the built-in Astro image component. We can give it an alt. I'm just going to say me, and then we can specify a width and the height, and we're going to do it like so, and we're going to hit save. Okay, so we have these two components ready. Let's see how we can use them. Well, we're going to use them in index.astro, that's for sure. And we know that we will have the hero component here first, and then the about component second. Just make sure that we also import them appropriately, like so. But the question is, how do we send the props? So let's start with the hero component. The hero component requires the hero text and the hero description. So how are we going to get that? Well, we just wrote strappy.js, which allows us to call the fetch API function, where we can specify an endpoint, and then we're going to specify the page to be landing page. And technically, if we've done everything correctly, that's going to return us the data that we need. So let's go to hero.astro. Let's go to index.astro rather, and then create a variable called page data, and then call the fetch API, which auto imports from lib/strappy. And my endpoint is going to be pages. Why is it pages? Well, essentially, let me actually copy this here. What we need to reconstruct is this, right? So the endpoint is in fact pages. And then we need to populate landing page. So we need to make sure that we call page, and then we specify that we're looking for the information inside the dynamic zone called landing page. And then the last option that we set is the wrapped by key, which is going to be data. Now again, wrapped by key, just to let you know what it does, every time when you get a response back from Strappy, it is wrapped by a key called data. And then basically we're just going to extract that and make sure that we access the data itself without having to manually go into the data property. And this functionality is enabled by the strappy.js file. So if I go and look at wrap by key, what it's doing is just passes that to the data that comes back from the fetch API request. Okay, so this particular if statement is just going to make sure that I actually get the data and not the data property and then the data attached to it. So I can work directly with the data itself. Okay, so this page data should technically contain exactly this information that we have here. So what we can do then is make sure that we look for the underscore component property and check if we are looking at the hero or the about components. And then we essentially have the data right here that we need to send as props to the appropriate components that we've created. So I'm going to create another variable and call that hero data, where I'm going to say page data.find, and then make sure that this is now looking at the double underscore component, and I make sure that that is equal to hero.hero. So that's going to be my hero data. And then now I can extract the hero text and the hero description from hero data, or make sure that it's an empty object. And all I need to do again is exactly the same for the page data, right? So the about data. So I'm going to say page data.find page data, where the pd dot underscore component is equal to about. And now I can extract about text from about data, or make that an empty object again. And remember, I also need the information about the picture. And this is now a little bit more tricky because it is inside the about photo property, which has a data property, which then has the attributes property. So I'm going to extract about photo, and from there I'm going to extract data, and from there I'm going to extract attributes, and from that I'm going to extract URL, which is going to be called about photo URL, and make this whole thing equal to about data. All right, so we have about text, we have about photo, and now we can use those to send as props to the appropriate components. All right, let's hit save and let's see what we're going to get if we run our project. And look at that. We now have our landing page built based on Strappy's dynamic zones. So welcome to the Wizarding World is something that I had in my text, but dive into the magic that is essentially the two pieces of text that comes back from the appropriate components. Then we have the about component and the image of this made up wizard, of course. Now, if I edit this hero text and I add, say, 3 exclamation marks, and if I hit save, then that is going to be reflected inside the Astro project as well. So now you have a way whereby the application is put together so that the content, even the page content, is managed from the CMS itself. All right, so far so good, but there's still a lot more things that we need to do. So next up, we're going to take a look at how to implement the blog, at least how to implement the blog in English. And that's going to involve a couple of steps. First and foremost, I don't want to list all the articles in one single go, but rather I would like to paginate them. Now, if you go and make an API call to /API/blogs, you will see that you get the English and the Spanish versions and all the images and everything else available for the particular posts. And I have populated these posts, so you will have all of these as well here. So there's about 6 or 7 posts. And if I just collapse this, so this is the data bit. But Strapi also returns us this meta information with pagination. So we can see there are a total of 5 articles with a page size of 25, and we are on page number 1 and page count is 1. And you can of course manipulate this. So I could pass in a query where the page size is not 25, but rather 2 or 5 or 10 or whatever else we want. Now, for the purposes of making this example, I didn't want to populate the CMS with, tens and hundreds of posts. We're just going to do a pagination of 2 posts each, because the logic is going to be still the same. So it doesn't matter if you paginate 5 articles at a page size of 2 or 500 articles at a page size of 10, the logic is always going to be exactly the same. And again, we're going to be very lucky, because if you look at the Astro docs, Astro has built-in support for pagination. And this is exactly what we are going to implement as well. So notice there's a built-in endpoint, a built-in dynamic endpoint called page in square brackets. And that will allow us to do pagination for our blog posts coming from Strapi as well. All right, so let's actually go back to the editor. Under pages, let's create a new folder. Let's call it blog. And inside the blog folder, let's create a new file called page.astro, making sure that you wrap page in square brackets. So what is this page or Astro file is going to achieve? Well, what I would like it to achieve is something very simple. I would like it to go and make a fetch API request to grab all the blog posts and then give me the pagination information as well as the titles of the blog posts. So we're going to be writing some JavaScript here, and what the Astro documentation recommends is that we create an asynchronous function called getStaticPaths. And this is something that we've used before, and we destructure the paginate property from this. In here, we need to make a request to Strapi itself, and we're going to use our fetch API, where our endpoint this time around is going to be blog. Why? Because it is the blog's endpoint. It's actually blog. So it's the blog's endpoint that is going to list all the data that we need plus the pagination information that we need. So the endpoint is going to be blogs, and it is again wrapped by the key data. Then once we have this, we will be able to grab the articles, because that's just going to be what the response come back with. And then all we need to do is we need to return paginate, which we just destructured from here, specify the data set that we have, and as a parameter, we can pass it a page size, and the page size is going to be 2. Last but not least, and this is the last step that we need to add here, we need to destructure page from astro.props. And if you follow these steps, you have enabled pagination inside your Astro project. So all this is going to do is going to make a request to blogs inside the Strapi CMS. It's going to grab all the articles back and it's going to paginate them 2 articles per page. And then what's left is, of course, making sure that we have the layout. So that's imported. I'm also going to print out which page we are on. And notice this page prop that we are extracted here. We used object destructuring here. We can actually access properties on it like current page, which at all times will tell us which page we are on at the moment. And then I'm just going to keep things simple. We're just going to have an unordered list again. And instead of doing articles, again, we're going to do page.data.map, where for each article, we are going to print a list item, and we're just going to specify article.attributes.title. Why is it attributes.title? Well, again, if we go back here, you'll see that the title is under attributes inside our response that comes back from Strapi. All right, so let's actually hit save and see if this is going to work. So technically all we need to do now is go to /blog/1, for example, and see what we get. All right, so we are at localhost 4321 /blog/1, and look at that. We get page 1, Introduction to Harry Potter, and then the Brightest Witch Hermione. If we go to blog/2, we get another 2 articles. If we go to blog/3, we get yet another article, and we always get the correct page numbers. This is quite amazing. Furthermore, what's even more amazing is that using this page prop, we can have access to things like the next and the previous URLs. So we can actually have a place under the articles where we can automatically go back and forth between the pages. So let's see how that would work. So we can say page.url.prev, which is short for previous. So if that's true, then we're just going to have a link in here that actually goes to the previous page. Otherwise, we're not going to print anything. And if the next URL is available, then we're just going to go to the next page. Otherwise, not printing anything, like so. And so now, notice we are on page number 3. The only link that we get is previous page. So if I click that, we go back to page 2, where we can go to previous page or next page. So if previous page goes to page 1, notice we only get next page. So now we get this really nice pagination going on automatically based on the content found inside the CMS itself. This is really, really amazing. Okay, so next up, what we need to do is, of course, make sure that we can actually read these articles. So inside the list item, I'm going to create an actual link, and we're going to make the article title the URL. But where are we going to be pointing? Well, I would like to make sure that we go to /blog. And remember, we also have a slug. So we want to use this slug as the path to the blog post itself. So we will do article.attributes.slug. But of course, we now need to implement that. So I'm going to click New File. We're going to call this slug.astro. And this is where we're going to be rendering the article itself. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. One thing is for sure that we're going to be using the layout just like how we used it before. And then ideally we would like to have an image from the article posted, the title and the actual content. We are going to be using what we've used before, the static parts. Why? Because we would like to generate all this information ahead of time using static site generation. So we're going to have an asynchronous function here called getStaticParts. And we're just going to grab the articles, and we have, the fetch API that allows us to do that, which we created. And we're going to say endpoint is going to be blogs again, and wrap by key is going to be data. All right, so far so good. And remember, in the very beginning of this workshop, we talked about the dynamic endpoints in Strapi. We need to return parameters. So we need to return parameters inside this getStaticParts function. So we need to iterate through every single article, and we're going to return an object that contains params, where the parameter is what? Well, it is the slug, because that's what we are using here in the file name. And the slug is going to be article.attributes.slug. And we will send article as the props as well. And I think that would be it. Hopefully, yeah, that should be it. And of course, now we just need to display the article. Let's just print out the article title, article.attributes.title, and make sure that everything works. So go back to the browser, and now let's see what happens if we click Introduction to Harry Potter. We have article is not defined, so let's see what we've done incorrectly. And apologies, of course, we are sending article as props. I just forgot to actually grab that. So if we do astro.props, hopefully if we go back here, now we get the title printed. Excellent. So if I go back and click on another post, we now get the title of that post printed as well, which is exactly what we were after. All right, so let's see what we can do about the content. Now, if I go back to the Strapi request itself, notice that the content is in a markdown format, since that's the actual data type that we picked inside the content manager, right? When we selected content, we said, hey, that should be a markdown format. Now we need to somehow format this markdown into displayable HTML. And in order to do that, we will create a custom component inside Astro. And we will also need to install the dependency. So I'm going to be installing a new dependency via the npm install command. And this one is going to be called marked. It's a package that allows us to take markdown and then essentially parse it as HTML. So how are we going to do that? Well, I like to create a separate component, as I said, to do this. And let's call it the markdown component. It's going to be an Astro component. And in here, I'm going to import marked from the marked package. I'm going to take the content. I'm going to parse astro.props.content. So basically, this markdown component.astro file is going to receive a content prop, and I directly send that to marked.parse, which will be able to parse our markdown and return HTML for us. And I just use the article HTML element, and there is an attribute inside Astro that you can use where you can directly set the HTML for a particular element. And, obviously this is going to be equal to the parsed markdown content like so. And now we can go back to slug.astro, and underneath the title, we can use this markdown component, and the content is going to be equal to article.attributes.content. All right, let's hit save. Come back here, And now we get the markdown content as HTML displayed. All right, let's go to another page. Let's look at another one. And that seems to be working as well. Now, the one thing that's missing is, of course, the image itself. And again, the image data comes back as part of the API request. So let's add that to the articles as well. Let's maybe add it on top of the H1. It's going to be a simple image element this time around, where the source is going to be, again, the strappy URL plus the attributes. Or, you could add the image component if you want to from Astro Assets. It doesn't really make much of a difference. The source is just going to be import.meta.env.strappy_URL plus the article.attributes.data.attributes again .format.small.url, and then you can add the width and the height to match exactly what Strapi comes back with. So this is the large and this is the small one. So the small one is 500 by 500. So we can actually match that if we want to, or we can resize it if we want to. So let's just say width is equal to 500 and then height is equal to 500 as well. And then for the alt text, we could use something like, we could use the article.attributes.title again, like so. All right. So let's see what we get right now. Okay, so this is not working. And I think I messed up the path. So it's article.attributes.image.data.attributes.format.small. So I think this is it. Maybe you can, do some destructuring here, but regardless, this should display an image for us. There we go. So here we have Ron. This is the article about Ron. Let's try another one. Okay, so the images are now also being picked up, and then we get the markdown formatting in the right way as well. All right, so this is the English blog. Let's talk about the Spanish blog as well, because again, we need to make sure that that works for us. Astro also has internationalization features, and it has internationalization based routing. Again, I very highly recommend that you take a look at the documentation, but we're going to go through setting this up together right now. So the very first thing that we need to do, let me just close all these files out a little bit, is to go into astro.config.mjs, and in here we need to specify the i18n object, where we specify the default locale to be en, but we also specify all the available locales, which is going to be Spanish, and then English as well. And basically how the routing works is that now we will need to create inside the blog folder a new folder called ES. And in here, I'm just going to create those two files again, page.astro, and then we need to create slug.astro as well. But again, remember, this is now inside the ES folder, so the Spanish folder. And content-wise, it's going to be pretty much the same that, what we had before, except, the verbiage is going to be Spanish, and the API core is going to specifically specify that we are looking for the Spanish locale. So I'm going to copy page.astro to the Spanish folder. And when we make the fetch API request, we're going to say locale is ES. So based on this helper file that we created together, what this is going to do, if there is a locale, is that it's going to end the locale value to the API request. So it's going to basically say end locale is equal to ES. And so if we make this call in Strapi, we will only get the Spanish articles back. And that's exactly what we need to do right here. So in page.astro, the information that we get back now is going to be the Spanish blog posts. And instead of page, I'm just going to say página. And then in here, we are just going to say, so we're not going to say previous page, but página anterior and página siguiente. Okay. Now, the other thing is with the slug. So even though the slug value is going to be the right one, we can't really go to /blog/ the slug because we're missing the folder that we just created, which is ES. Luckily for us, there is a built-in helper method in Astro that we can use, which is called get relative local URL. And we pass in ES, and this is now going to give us the right path, which is going to be /blog/ES/ and then the slug itself. And get relative local URL got imported from Astro Internationalization, like so. Okay, so that's pretty much it. And then now, of course, in slug.astro, we need to copy what we had for the English blog, and we need to now say locale is Spanish, and that's pretty much it. All right, so let's go and open up blog/es/1, for example. And of course, we need to import everything here because we are now one directory deeper into our project. Just make sure that we do these as well. Okay, so look at that. We are now in the Spanish blog, first page, Spanish articles. If I click on any of these, then we now get the article in Spanish. And if I go to the next page, this is just going to be all Spanish articles. Excellent. Now, the next thing that I would like to talk about is obviously these two navigation items. So blog goes to blog/1, and then the Spanish one also goes to blog/es. And notice that even though I never set up to go to the first page, they automatically do that. So this is again done by Astro itself. So if I just open nav.astro, notice how I have blog/es. But if I click blog, it automatically goes to /blog/1. If I click /blog/es, it goes to /1 there as well. So I don't need to worry about that anymore. Okay, so our application is nearly ready. I would like to add one more feature. And that feature, and we can start with the English blog, and then we're just going to add that to the Spanish blog as well. I would like to print out the date when the article was published. And that comes back as a piece of metadata from Strapi. So we have created that, updated that, and published that. So we can take this, and I would like to use the Internationalization API to say something like, this article was published 5 days ago or yesterday or something. And so I'm going to add the helper function to slug.astro. I can add it under astro.props. And this one is going to be just called format relative time, where we pass in a date string. And then I use the new JavaScript Internationalization API's relative time format, set it to English, set it to auto, calculate the days difference, the hours difference, the minutes difference, and then essentially what this relative time variable is going to give me based on the articles published at time, something like this article was published 2 days ago, an hour ago, 2 weeks ago, so on and so forth. And I would like to add that as well, let's say underneath the title. So in this paragraph, I just want to say something like article written, and then print out relative time, and then add the dot. So what we're going to get now, if I go to the English blog right here, we're going to get this message that says article written 17 days ago. Okay, let's check another one. I think I have some newer articles like this one. This was written 7 days ago. So this is quite amazing. So let's also add this to the Spanish version. And by the way, probably you're thinking about this right now. There's a lot of things that I'm duplicating, right? So for example, this relative time format string could also go and be part of the lib folder. So in the same way where we have strappy.js, you could add this to a separate file and just call it when necessary. And of course, what we need to do here, and this is why I really love the new internationalization API from JavaScript, is that we could say that this is in a Spanish time format and just add the same paragraph here that will say artículo escrito and then relative time. And so now if we go to the Spanish blog, this is now going to write out the same string, but all in Spanish. And notice that I never added, any of these terms. That's just a JavaScript internationalization API, which is quite amazing. Now, here comes the problem. This is statically generated, right? So we are statically generating these pages. So essentially, if I publish an article and, that was 17 days ago, if I visit this article without rebuilding the site, even in 10 days, it's just going to say 17 days, right? Because this information here, the relative time information, is generated as part of static site generation because I'm using getStaticPaths. And maybe that's not the best way to do this. Also, if you post new articles, and this is spelled out inside the Strapi documentation as well. So when you post new articles, you have two options. Option number one is that you set up a hook so that on your deployment platform, so say you deploy this entire project to Netlify, every time when you save a new article, you trigger a deploy or a redeploy of your site. And that's how the new blog post will appear. Or option number two is that you're going to change the default behavior of Astro from static site generation to server-side rendering. And that's exactly what we're going to do together for this project. So I'm going to quit this process and we're going to type in npx astro add node. That's exactly what we've done before. Again, if you want to deploy this to Netlify, then do Netlify, etc., etc. And this is going to add the node adapter to the config file and set the output to be server, which is exactly what we want. Then we're going to go into index.astro and we're going to say that this particular page can be pre-rendered. And then what other pages can be pre-rendered? Well, the pagination could get pre-rendered, or actually we don't really need to, but let's just add that here. Probably you want to be a little bit careful with this, but again, this would get the data set when you build it. So just be careful with this one. But we're going to focus on slug.astro because we're going to change slug.astro around a little bit so that as opposed to it using getStaticPaths, which is for static site generation, it is now going to be using server-side rendering. Okay, so we're going to change the code around. So we're going to remove, or not remove, but rather comment out all of the getStaticPaths section. And we're going to write server-side rendering stuff. Now we're going to grab the slug from astro.params, right? Because we're still looking for the slug itself. And then we're going to write a try catch block here. And we're going to try to grab the article by calling await fetch API. The endpoint is again still going to be blogs. still going to be read by the key data. And this time around, we're going to adding rep by list true, and we're going to pass a query, where we're going to pass a query to Strapi, whereby we're going to want to query by the slug, and we want to make sure that the slug is equal to the slug that gets passed in as params. Otherwise, we're just going to make sure that this is empty. Okay, so with this, we can actually go to /blogs and pass a slug-based filter. So this is going to be the parameter that gets sent to Strapi, and we send the slug information along with it. If an article cannot be found, then we're just going to use astro.redirect 404. And one homework that I'm going to give to you is to learn more about how to create 404 pages in Strapi. Okay, and everything else can pretty much still say the same. So let's go ahead and test this out. Okay, so published at is not something that can be found. So maybe let's just see here. So we have the article. We tried to run the article. Oh, it's because, sorry, that's in the Spanish folder. I just realized that, yeah, in the Spanish folder, we need to do exactly the same. So we need to get rid of get static parts. And then I'm just going to copy what we've written here. So we're just going to copy this English version and just copy that over right here, except we're going to send the locale to be ES in here. Okay. And now if we go to blog, we go to the first one. Excellent. So this is now using server-side rendering, which also means that if we add a new blog entry, it's going to have the up-to-date information in terms of the relative time. So let's actually try this, and you can try this on your own. So I'm going to go back to the content manager, go back to the blog, create a new entry about a character. I don't know who yet, but then we will test this out together in just a moment. So I finished adding an English and a Spanish article about Luna Lovegood here. And if you go back to the application without actually rebuilding it, you will notice that the article does not come up inside the pagination. And this is also going to cause a problem, right? Because remember, we said that the pagination should still use static generation. But let's change that around a little bit so that the pagination also uses server-side rendering so that we get always the latest data listed for the pagination page as well. And now if you open up this page, which is the article about Luna Lovegood, we'll see that this article was written 7 minutes ago. Now, of course, if we're going to wait a couple of minutes, then this will dynamically update and will say article was written 10 minutes ago, 12 minutes ago, a week ago, so on and so forth. In fact, just to demo this to you, I waited about a minute, and now you can see that article is now written 8 minutes ago. The only reason why this works dynamically is because this particular page uses server-side rendering and not static side generation. With static side generation, it would show us a time, and that would be the time when the entire page got last redeployed.